Hello, welcome to our live stream of our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. I'm Harley Schlanger. Today is March 16th, 2023, and we'd like you to be involved in this discussion. If you have some questions or some comments, you can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the YouTube chat section. Now, Helga, to begin with, on Tuesday, you released a call for an emergency conference to reorganize the bankrupt financial system. This is posted on the Schiller Institute site. It's been released in many languages for wide distribution. And I'd like to begin by having you summarize what you called for and what our viewers can do to make sure that this conference can take place.
Issued a statement calling for the convening of an emergency conference to basically reorganize the bankrupt financial system, because as the bankruptcy of the Silicon Valley Bank and two other minor banks in the United States indicates that we are fully back in the outbreak of a systemic crisis, because the reason why the situation in 2008, which was a systemic crisis, was not dealt with by the central banks. They did not remedy the root causes of the bankruptcy of the system, but decided to go for quantitative easing. Since 15 years, there was a reckless pumping of liquidity into the system called quantitative easing, zero interest rate, even negative interest rate. And that system has now exploded naturally in combination with a couple of other mad economic decisions, such as the relentless sanctions against Russia and other countries, but especially the sanctions against Russia have completely boomeranged, and you have a big blowback by an increase in energy prices. So all of this came together, and now we are basically in a situation where you have the skilla of if the central banks are trying to combat that inflation by raising the interest rates, you could have what Bill Gross, who is one of the former head of PIMCO, called the supernova phenomena, that you could have a chain reaction collapse of the entire system, basically, where you have the indebted firms in the so-called industrialized countries, the capital flight out of the emerging markets, leading to a chain reaction collapse. Now, that is a very real possibility, and the fact that President Biden immediately said the banking system is sound, and then also Habeck, the German economic minister, said something similar. He is an author of children's books and thinks that the world should be as he wishes to, but unfortunately that's not the real world. So, if the skilla of hyperinflation is avoided, the Charybdis of the collapse is the other option, and there is no solution within the system. So therefore I have called for an emergency conference to be convened, since it affects the whole world, by the UN General Assembly. If they cannot do it because some countries are opposing to this approach, there's the G20, which should be representative of the world population. And if they can't or won't do it, some other responsible body should do it, like the BRICS Plus, which is now the BRICS Plus, about 24 countries who have applied for membership, the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, the African Union, ASEAN. A whole combination of such organizations could get together and say that they declare a goodwill action to solve the problem, because confidence is extremely important in a situation like that, and that such an emergency conference should be convened. And one of the aspects of it should be the application of the 4 laws of LaRouche, who foresaw this a long time ago and suggested 4 basic measures which would fix the system. First, to have a global Glass-Steagall banking separation. Second, to have a national bank installed in every country to put the credit equation under the sovereign control of governments. Third, connect all of these national banks into a new credit system, which should have the main purpose of issuing cheap credit for long-term investment into infrastructure and industrial projects in especially the global south, with the aim to increase the living standard dramatically of the population of the global south and the poor in the so-called north. So that, and then also invest in high technology to increase in the productivity of the production, which is urgently necessary. So that is my proposal, and we have circulated it widely. We have translated it, as you say, in many languages, and I would hope that that is encouraging and contributing to the decision of some governments to go in this direction. Now, for people who may be surprised by what is happening, I can only suggest to watch a historically important video, and that was one which was made on the 25th of July in 2007 by Zepp-LaRouche, who, after the tremblings of the real estate market in the United States had started in 2007, 1 week before the whole thing started to really go into a collapse, he suggested measures to be taken. And if you watch that video where he said, look, this system is absolutely finished, there's nothing you can do, all you will see from now on is how the different aspects come to the surface. And then he suggested the Homeowners Banking Protection Act, which, if it would have been implemented at that time, could have stopped it, but it was not implemented. That led to the 2008 crisis, the Lehman Brothers AIG crisis. And, for a short moment then, people were talking about the need to have a new Bretton Woods, a new credit system, but that lasted not very long. And then very soon at the next G20 meeting in November 2008, the decision already was made to go for the quantitative easing. And that's what we have seen in the last 15 years. And now this has come back with a vengeance. And that is why we absolutely need now such measures, or else, we are really looking at potential chaos of unimaginable dimensions. So I would like you to look at this statement. I made a short video about it. The text is available on the site of the Schiller Institute, and help us to circulate it to all responsible institutions, governments, parliaments, other institutions who are concerned with the state of the economy. And I hope that we can really generate such a change before it is too late.
I think one of the most important points you made is that there's no solution within the system. And I think people have to let that sink in and realize that's why we need some fundamental change. Now, Helga, not surprisingly, the first couple of questions are on the bank crisis and the present financial panic. We have from Jim Stamps, he asks, without Glass-Steagall being brought in, do you think Title II of the Dodd-Frank bill, which is the bail-in part, will be in full force, where the banks can steal one's checking, savings, lockbox stocks, and valuables? And also, do you think there'll be a run on the physical economy by the banking, energy, food, and health cartels?
Well, I mean, the problem is that, as long as you have the power of the speculators, and, unfortunately, what we have seen with the paradigm shift in the last really decades, the erosion of Glass-Steagall already in the 80s and in the 90s, the final abandoning of Glass-Steagall in 99, and after that an increase of deregulation, whereby basically the politics, the parliaments, the Congress, they became more or less instruments of these financial interests, and they made all the laws in such a way that the speculators would come out on top. And that is a mechanism which needs to be broken. And given the fact that, the present Congress cannot, in my view, if I'm mistaken, I would be very happy, but the present Congress cannot be expected to do what Franklin D. Roosevelt did in 1933. As I said, if they will do it, I will be happy to say I was erroneous. And that's why I think you need an international action of governments who basically put a system into place where the common good is back on the agenda. And that means, among other things, that the power of the cartels has to be broken. If you talk to the farmers in the United States or Holland or Germany for that matter, they are telling you that there are being laws implemented right now which means that agricultural production will be halved or cut to 1/3. And that is all on the altar of profit maximization, and that is definitely something which has to be changed, and that does require many, many different steps. But what I'm suggesting is the absolute first precondition to prevent a collapse of the system.
Okay, our next question is from Sue, who essentially says that she's concerned about the totalitarian implications of a move toward a central bank digital currency system. So she asks, is it possible to create a decentralized financial system using a digital currency, not by central banks, but that would do away with the control of our communal energies by the money swindling system?
Well, I think that is not the right way to go, because there is right now an effort to introduce all kinds of currencies, cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, which all have the effect to basically move it away from the control of national sovereign governments into private hands. And that is the basic flaw which has occurred in the last basically last 50 years, one can say, really since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, there was a step-by-step deregulation leading in this direction already. And that is exactly what is the problem, that with the central banks right now, we have private institutions who control credit. And, this has been accelerated in the recent period by the kind of transformation which has been promoted by the World Economic Forum, by the annual Jackson Hole meeting, central bankers meeting. So the opposite has to occur. Now there is an effort to create a new alternative currency based on commodities and based on a system of national banks. That is not yet completely ready. But this is an effort which is being made as a result of the US dollar weaponizing the dollar by confiscating assets of other countries, like 300 billion from Russia, 10 billion from Afghanistan, sums from other countries. And what did these countries do as a consequence? They decided that, that it was too dangerous to keep assets in dollar denominations, and therefore they are creating a de-dollarization by moving trade into their national currencies, and with the idea to create a new international currency, not based on monetary values, but based on commodities. That is not yet totally finished, basically because there are all kinds of obstacles, like the sanctions against Russia, makes ruble, a difficult currency. Then also naturally the general condition of the developing countries, where some currencies are not fully convertible, like the renminbi or the rupee. that can all be solved, but it may be now a situation where these countries will have to speed up their steps. And I think I know that these countries will do this no matter what. If the West is trying to block this and trying to answer with, trying to contain it, it can only lead to a catastrophe. The wise thing would be that, Western countries, the European countries, the United States signal that they are willing to cooperate, and that would really solve the problem. But I think that does require some pressure in the countries of the West from, constituencies like farmers, trade unions, entrepreneurs, CEOs of SMEs, people who are interested in the physical economy. And that does require a major mobilization, and that is what we are trying to encourage.
Well, on that, we have a question from the chat room. Are there any notables yet who have signed on to support your call? And the person suggested maybe you should try Ron Paul.
Well, I'm perfectly happy to invite Ron Paul. The problem is that some people believe in the Austrian school of economics, which refutes the role of the state. That needs to be discussed, because in a crisis like this, the state is practically the only institution which can intervene. So I'm not entirely sure. I know that the statement has been put out in many languages, and I only got reports that there was a lot of support in Latin America, in many countries, but it's a little bit too early since it's only 2 days since I issued this call, and I think we have to see what we will generate in the next days.
Well, and the viewers can help us get notables to sign by just contacting people who have an interest in this. Also from the chat, Helga, from Ugo, banks are not failing in Russia. Could it be that in the West it's just that corrupt?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, he said that banks are not failing in Russia. And he said, is it possible that it's just that the banks in the West, the system in the West, is that corrupt?
Well, there are some problems in Russia as well, and that has been recently underlined again by Sergei Glaziev in an interview where he said that the central bank still has an undue importance, which comes from the Yeltsin period, when basically Yeltsin was very cooperative with the demands of the West to deindustrialize Russia and to go for a liberal system. That has not entirely been remedied, but in general, I would say that the general condition in Russia is better. I think there is no transparency in the West. Look at all these scandals which happened, starting with the Madoff scandal, with the various manipulations. There has never been a banker being put in jail. There was no no commission, no Pecora commission, as Roosevelt had introduced it, to investigate. This is still a very, very big gray zone, and therefore we are sitting on the powder keg we are sitting. I think a Pecora commission or something like that would be absolutely urgent.
Okay. I want to move on to a couple of other questions, but if you have more questions on the banking situation, the financial situation, again, you can send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org. This is a question from John Shanahan, a civil engineer, who asks, why is the Schiller Institute focus, at the same time you're doing many good things on Earth, but why are you setting a priority for the nearly impossible tasks of sending Earthlings to out into the solar system with fusion nuclear power? And he says this seems to be high expectations. There's enough hydrocarbon fuel. So why are you proposing these seemingly utopian ideas?
Because we are human, and the very characteristic of human beings is that we are progressing and that we can discover new laws of the physical universe. And to use thermonuclear fusion as a propulsion will be the way how we will make space travel possible, because there's no way how people, astronauts, can safely travel to Mars or even beyond that by using traditional fuel kinds, because it just takes too long. So I mean, space is really important. People who have poo-pooed the idea of space travel or a city on Mars or even a village on the moon, I mean, they have been proven wrong, and now you have several leading space nations all going in the direction. We had last year already rovers flying around Mars from 3 nations landing there. And that was China, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates. And the idea of going into space is what will get humanity off the ground, or get the noses off the ground, that we are not earthlings. As long as you are stuck with just one planet, you think you are so susceptible to all the wrong ideas, like that there are limits to growth. This ideology could have only taken ground because people thought about one planet Earth. The moment you start to think that for a human being even to lift off the surface of the Earth, just to overcome gravity and go into space, not even landing on the moon, just lifting from the planet, from the surface of the Earth, was a gigantic step. It meant that you could develop infrastructure from just developing infrastructure on the continents of the Earth into nearby space. That I mean, if you look at the visions of Kraft-Ericke, who was a German-American space pioneer, he developed the rocket of the Apollo mission, and he had beautiful designs about building a city on the moon as a starting point for space travel. He developed this notion of the extraterrestrial imperative, which basically was the idea that there is a need for man to eventually conquer space and colonize space, which will have an incredible impact on his and her behavior, because it forces man to put his action into cohesion with the laws of the universe. Because if you are in a spaceship, you cannot just have a freak out and step outside and take a joint. It will not be good for your health if you do that. It forces you to be rational. It forces you to be in cohesion with the lawfulness of the universe. And I think that is the future of humanity. And I think anybody who looks at the results of first the Hubble telescope, which discovered that there are 2 trillion galaxies out there, and now the incredible pictures of the James Webb telescope, bringing the question of what is our universe, was there a Big Bang or not? I mean, all of these questions are mind-boggling, and I think the more people think about this and think about what is the role of humanity in that very vast universe, the better for his mental health.
Helge, here's a question for you from Deutschland. There was a parliamentary motion for an investigation of the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage that was shot down in the Bundestag yesterday. While everyone knows Russia was one of the targets, Germany and Europe more generally were the other targets of the geopoliticians behind this. Is there any chance for a break from of Germany from NATO?
Well, it does not look like it right now, but I think the hysteria with which all parties reacted to this inquiry of a parliamentarian from the Alternative for Germany is really telling. Because, I mean, it is a fact that the story which was unearthed by Seymour Hersh, he had such an incredible closure. He had all the places where the divers were trained. He had all the details, what technical means were necessary to plant these explosives, who has the capacity. So that was a story which, was so absolutely, or is so absolutely credible, that for the German parliament not to want to investigate that and have instead a complete hysterical outburst by everybody, that anybody who even asks questions who was behind this explosion is a Putin agent, is anti-American, is a conspiracy theorist. I mean, that's just completely ridiculous, and it's not believed by the general population. I mean, we are in contact with people, people in East Germany, for example, who are now going bankrupt because the Nord Stream cheap gas is no longer available. Many others. I don't think this will go away. And I think also, the fact that many governments around the world are continuously asking questions. Why do they do that? Because if this sabotage is not clarified, the danger and the culprits are brought to justice, the danger naturally is that any major infrastructure around the world could be a target of a similar attack. If you don't know who did it, it can be done again. And that would be, the opening the sluices to complete chaos. So I don't think this thing will go away. And I know that Russia is insisting that they be part of an investigation, which is absolutely legitimate given the fact that they have a big economic interest in the Nord Stream pipelines. But I think also increasingly other governments are demanding the same. And Seymour Hersh has said that he has a couple of more shoes to drop. So we should, expect that this is not going away. And, if it turns out that it was the United States in cahoots with Norway, what happens then to the EU and to NATO? Well, I don't dare to make a prediction, but, the likelihood that the trust in these bodies will completely evaporate is very high.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. This is an interesting one from Alejandro, a biology student in Mexico. He asks about new experiments being carried out in gene modification, as in the case of the Chinese twins that were modified with the genetic technique to cure them of AIDS. And he says, what kind of ethics do we require so that this kind of research doesn't escape our control?
Well, that is a very, very difficult question, because obviously, it's one thing if one tries to improve vegetables and food and things like that. And the question of finding remedies for human diseases obviously is a tremendous challenge. If they will have breakthroughs in medicine, it will require that we answer the question of what is life, how does it function, in a much more fundamental way than it has been done so far. Obviously this is very difficult, but with all technologies, it is always the question, what is the human being who is doing it, for what purpose? You can use anything for good reasons, for good ends and for bad ends. And, I can only say there are so many new technologies, starting with artificial intelligence, starting the biochemical techniques. And you can see that, if people regard that as a threat or not, and trust their government or not, that is the big difference. This is why in China, for example, it was amazing during the pandemic, the artificial intelligence and digitalization was tremendously helpful in tracking, in, containing the pandemic, and people felt comfortable with it. And that is very clearly because the majority of the population does trust their government, while in the West, people are extremely wary about the application of similar technologies because they don't trust the government. There is a huge difference. So I can only say that there is no way how technological progress, scientific progress can be contained. It simply will not happen. All we can do is to find, a way how we can improve the character of the human species. And that is why the Schiller Institute has always put so incredibly much emphasis on why a cultural renaissance of the classical tradition is absolutely important. Because if you don't have the idea that human beings should improve through lifelong learning, through the ennoblement of their soul, through the education of their emotions, that the emotions develop on the same level like their mind, their reason. All of these things are part of a healthy society, and actually that is completely rejected by the liberal society, which says everything goes, everything is allowed, and they call any government which has the obligation for moral improvement, they call autocratic, dictatorial. Now, when the society in the West functioned, it had similar principles like, that people should become better. Christianity, other great religions have the demand that people should get rid of their sins and improve, and also not bury the talents they have received, but should develop them. So we need a lot of discussion about that, and I can only say that we really must take responsibility for the moral condition of the societies in which we are living.
Well, Helga, let's go back to banking for the final question. Someone wrote in, do you think it's possible that the high-profile collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank was done on purpose so the big six banks can buy them out to get access to their deposits? Obviously talking about the expectation that other regional banks will fail.
I don't think so. Look, what happened yesterday was that Credit Suisse, which is one of the big banks too big to fail, basically got so much into trouble. They lost 40%, or I forgot now the exact figure. And now they are requesting a bailout from the Swiss National Bank of 50 billion euro, or the equivalent of 50 billion euro. Now that is not exactly fitting the model you are prescribing there. And the problem is really that all the banks are equally exposed, and there is no way how you can save this system. If you want to bail out all of these banks, you would have hyperinflation, and that is what we are on the way. That is why the European Central Bank today did not dare to stop the increase in the interest rate. You could have expected that, after the Fed went very rapidly to the 5% interest rate in the United States, and the European Central Bank was at 3%, which already showed you that, given the fact that the inflation in Europe is much higher than in the United States, if people would be rational, the interest rate in Europe would be higher than in the United States, but not so. But obviously, if people would be afraid that the increase in the interest rate is triggering more such collapses like Silicon Valley Bank, then they would have maybe made a pause. But the EZB did not dare to make a pause. They increased the interest rate today by another 50 basis points, going from 3 to 3.5%. So that brings up the question that there is some much, much bigger problem looming in the banking system. And that is why I can only ask you, circulate my emergency conference request as far and wide as you can, and do it quickly, because we are in the middle of a storm which will not go away in any way unless you have a fundamental reorganization of the system.
I'd like to thank everyone who sent in questions and comments. I think it's an interesting process we've launched here. We have occasional technical problems, but we'll get to them. Keep these questions coming. And for those who want to follow up what Helga just said, her call is available both in written and in video form on the schillerinstitute.com website. So, Helga, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to our visit again next week.
Yes, hopefully till next week.